Welcome to the Mets Pod. On today's episode, I am joined by special co-host Jim Duquette to break down what was not the best week for the Mets. Let's get to the show. Welcome to the Mets Pod. I'm Joe DeMayo. Filling in for Connor this week is special co-host, former Mets GM, SNY analyst, and really the most important thing he's ever done, my co-analyst in the spring breakout game, my friend Jim Duquette. Jim, I appreciate you joining. How's everything going today?
It's been way too long, Joe, since March. We haven't been together on a show since March, so I'm glad we're together again, finally.
Subscribe to the show at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your pods. If you'd like to drop us a review, drop us a mailbag question with that review. You can watch us on SNY's YouTube channel and ask mailbag questions in the comments under the show there as well. And a quick note to our recent winners of the Mets Pod hats at Renegade 1393 from a 5-star review, Evan Schwartz 2293 on YouTube, and Tron Robo Jim 6526 on YouTube. Please email info@sny.tv to claim your hat. All right, Jim. Let's get into the week that was. Tiny bit forward for a couple games, but the weekend certainly didn't close out too well. And how would you assess the Mets play over this last week where, look, this is a situation where this is a team that they don't need to just cobble together a couple series. The back is getting up against the wall. It's time that they really need a winning streak.
No, they really do. I think, there was a period of time that I'm like, all right, well, if you can just stay, somewhat above water or without sinking too far below, now you get Lindor back and get healthier, and some of these guys hopefully figure it out on the pitching staff, because there's been some ups and downs as we've seen with the starting rotation as well. Like, okay, well, you figure some things out. You know what? They hopefully can go on a run as you get closer to the August 3rd trade deadline, and you feel a little bit better about the team as you get maybe right around 500. And, that seems such a long way away still. Every time it looks like, as an example, we saw the offense for a period of time just start to swing the bat well. Then the pitching got derailed. I think going to Philly, when you play a team like that, you really get exposed if you're not a good team, not playing well. And that's basically what happened, notwithstanding the Thursday game, the Saturday and the Sunday game. They really were outclassed. And it really hurt because, Peralta is supposed to be your best pitcher, and he just gets annihilated. And then, we can get into the whole David Peterson thing if you want. We could do a whole show on how the Mets have handled David Peterson right now. And he hasn't pitched well, and I don't think they've handled him very well either.
Yeah, Jim, look, this rotation is obviously a really big problem for this team. And as you mentioned, when they hit, they don't pitch. When they pitch, they don't hit. And that is just what not good baseball teams do. Like when you can't get it all together for any extended period of time. But the rotation, they lost Clay Holmes, and I certainly understand that's a big loss. But with a team with the payroll and everything that the Mets have, losing one pitcher can't just ruin the whole situation. And, Freddy Peralta had obviously the blow up start on Saturday in Philadelphia. And outside of that, I think he's largely been kind of what Freddy Peralta's always been in Milwaukee. He's always been a 5-inning, maybe 6-inning guy. Right. And obviously the walks are up a little bit this year, but by and large, Freddy Peralta's been Freddy Peralta. Sean Manaea, I think he's turning it around. This is a guy that earlier in the year was on, DFA watch, like how much longer are the Mets going to have this contract? And he looks to be turning the corner a bit. Nolan McLean, after dealing with a couple rough starts, awesome in Philadelphia on Friday night. So nothing bad to say about McLean, but you get to the back of the rotation. And Jim, you said you want to talk about David Peterson. I'm going to give you the floor. Tell me everything you're feeling, because obviously that wasn't a great start for him on Sunday. And what I wouldn't say a must win, but a real important game for the Mets on Sunday, and Peterson just didn't give them much of a shot.
Well, yeah, and the first thing, just working, most recently to backwards, why is he even starting in Philadelphia when he's pitched well as a bulk guy? Why are we putting him in the starting rotation right out of the gate? And of course, he can't, he gives up 2 runs in the first inning. The ball doesn't even get out of the infield, and he's, continued to struggle with his command. But, for whatever reason, he has some kind of mental issue where he cannot pitch as a starter so far this year. And if you're gonna ever let him go into the rotation, you shouldn't be doing it against an offense like Philadelphia. You pick a softer landing spot. Now we go backwards. The last time that he was in we'll call it the rotation, right, against the Cardinals, he had 10 days off because somebody there thought the matchup was better for the Cardinals versus the Padres, who have one of the worst offenses in the sport,
Yeah.
but it's right-handed. It's a little more right-handed, but they skipped him, and after he was pitching well in the bulk role, and gave him basically 9 days off and had him pitch against the Cardinals, which was, in my opinion, wasn't a good matchup. So it makes me wonder on the preparation side of things, like who's making that decision. Why are they making that decision? What is it that they saw that they thought was a better matchup than the Padres? Was it just because they thought there were more right-handed hitters in the lineup? None of the right-handed hitters are hitting right now. Like, are they really watching what's going on with other teams? That's a preparation thing. And I wonder, because not everybody agrees with how you handle things. Like, I wonder if there's an environment there that you're able to disagree and actually go against the grain. So there's a lot there that have bothered me. And David Peterson has plenty to put on himself. He hasn't pitched well, but he accepted the role as the bulk guy, and now they're screwing around with his scheduling on that. He has every right to be upset by it, and I'm not surprised that he didn't pitch well, unfortunately.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me a couple weeks ago when Sal Licata filled in for Connor on this show. Sean Manaea at that time was the bulk guy, and Sal and I had a conversation. Should Manaea just stick in this bulk role where he's having some success, or should he move to the rotation? And he ends up moving to the rotation when Christian Scott goes on the IL, because, look, at some point you have to have like an actual starting pitcher taking the ball. But
Right.
but Peterson, to your point, he was pitching better as a bulk guy, and I don't really know the rhyme or reason as to why that is, because he's always been a starting pitcher. He
Right.
just became a bulk guy this year, frankly, for at any point in his big league career. And it seems you move him to rotation, and then things go even more backwards than they were when he was in a bulk role.
Yeah, and I think, listen, there are, his breaking stuff hasn't been the same. His sinker's been getting whacked hard. There's different things that have gone wrong with him, and it makes me wonder. Go back a couple years ago where he was having trouble finishing his pitches, and he had the hip issue. It sounds like he's still healthy. So, this is more about, mechanically, and there's almost like a, mental block when it comes to the rotation side. But I felt like they had at least come to an understanding or figured out that, hey, in this particular role, even though it doesn't necessarily work for the long haul for the season, it worked for him at the moment, and they were getting by with relative success with him on the mound. His ERA at one point was in the low twos, as a reliever, which included a lot of the bulk innings. So I would have been very, very hesitant to move him out of that role, and I certainly wouldn't have wanted to skip that spot, that position, and have him, be the low man on the totem pole in that particular situation.
I want to circle back to Freddy Peralta, who we talked about just a couple minutes ago, and obviously the start in Philadelphia, giving up 10 runs. Granted, he left with a couple guys on base, and Cionel Perez came in and gave up the home run, which added a couple more runs to his docket. But a 10 earned run outing is going to mess up your stats for probably the rest of the season. His ERA jumped basically a full run that day. When it comes to Freddy Peralta as a trade asset, because you and I both mentioned the Mets need a winning streak. And right now, the way we're talking about this rotation, I don't know if it's a rotation that can sustain a winning streak that the Mets need to have. So let's play in a hypothetical world that 6 weeks from now, when we're at the trade deadline, Freddy Peralta is somebody that the Mets are looking to sell. What do you think his trade value looks like? And when you look at just that start on Saturday, how much does that impact his value?
Right now, they've identified a mechanical flaw that he has to work out, right? The upper body in his lower half are not in sync, right? And you can work on that in between starts, and but what ends up happening invariably is if you're not, repetitive enough and you don't have that completely down, you get into the competition and you see that, it's still not perfectly out of whack. And you also have to kind of make adjustments along the way, which he's not able to do right now in game, right? It's got to be frustrating for him too, because this is not him as a pitcher. But until they get that worked out, and he's pitching more along the lines of, I'm not even going to say what he was pitching like last year, because that was at a high level. Like he was in the Cy Young conversation there for a while, ERA under 3, 175 innings pitched. Like now you're just looking at him, trying to get him on track for what he was maybe earlier in the season. And you're not going to be able to get anywhere near what you think you could get. Usually at the deadline, starting pitchers are the premium guys that are getting, a top 2 or 3 prospect in somebody's organization, and then 2 other prospects as well that are at the upper levels that can help you pretty soon. You're not getting that this year right now with Freddy Peralta. If he continues to pitch this way, the next 5 starts for, looking ahead a month from now, you're going to have to, if you're an opposing GM, you're going to be acquiring what looks like a back end starter and hoping that you can fix him, and get more out of him. And that's where, if you're the Mets, is it really worth it to trade him at that point? Maybe Clay Holmes is a guy, if he's healthy, would be a guy that you would turn and look at. But, right now you're not getting anywhere near what the asking price should be for a guy in Peralta's, with his resume going into his free agent year. And that's the unfortunate part about this. And, as bad as the season is going, you couldn't have predicted Peralta pitching as poorly as he has been.
Something I read too, Jim, earlier today is that there's some expectation that at this deadline, higher end prospects may not get dealt heading into what is looking like a lockout in the offseason, and
right.
Not clarity as to for what the financial system will look like in the major leagues next year, and might give some teams some reticence on trading young, controllable talent. Have you heard anything? I know it's still early. We're 6 weeks out, but have you heard anything kind of along those lines?
So yes, the short answer on that is yes, but I wondered this very early, back in the early part of June, especially when they were talking about controllable players. So players that you have another year at least of control. And it came up in the context of Adley Rutschman with the Orioles, if they were going to trade him, or Joe Ryan in Minnesota is one of the starters who's both are under control through 2027. But the question was, well, what system are we going to be playing in next year, right? If there's a salary cap, to control your payroll and your roster, and there'll be a grandfather in certain contracts, certainly. But do you want to give up, those guys that are going to be inexpensive for expiring contracts or another year, especially if you don't even know if you're going to play a full season next year, right? So that's a whole other factor that comes into it. So to hear, and then so fast forward, I've had a lot of conversations with general managers. My co-host on Sunday, Jim Bowden, writes for The Athletic. He's talked to a ton of teams. By our count, it looks like there's only about 8 teams right now looking for starting pitching. Half the league is looking for relief help, and I think a big part of why they don't want, they're not going after starting pitching is because of the acquisition cost. To your point, like the acquisition cost, meaning high end, high level, upper level prospects. You can go further down in the system and get, some potential upside, but there's way more risk there too. So, I think that's where the way the market sounds like, as of today, but all of that kind of comes into the fight. Like there's only about 3 teams that are really willing to make a deal at the moment. Colorado, San Francisco, maybe the Angels, although they're a mess, as an organization. And then I'm trying to think of the other one off the top of my head, but that's about it. Right now that are open for business, that are actually sellers. Everyone else seems to be waiting and taking the temperature and just kind of like, hey, let's see how we play over the next 3 weeks.
Yeah, I don't think Artie Moreno just ever allows the Angels to trade any of their veteran players, which, whatever, that's their problem. But let's circle back here to the Mets. On the offensive side of things, this could be looking up. I know this has been a downer of a show, but Francisco Lindor is playing here tonight for AAA Syracuse, and this very well may be his final rehab game. So now, let's just say it's tomorrow or Thursday, whatever. Francisco Lindor is back in the Mets lineup. You add him with Bo Bichette, who's been swinging a good bat over the last month plus. Juan Soto, obviously one of the best players in the world. Young guys like Carson Bench and AJ Ewing who are finding their footing and looking good at the big league level. Do you think they're, with Lindor back, do you think it makes enough of a difference to offset the issues that they're having with the starting rotation?
Well, I think that what it does, it gives you a little bit more margin of error, right? So right now, if your starters don't pitch well, you really don't feel like you have a chance to win on the offensive side. It's hard to generate 6 or 7 runs on a given night, and that's, I think the difference is, with Lindor back in the lineup and what you kind of were hoping the lineup would be, obviously absent of Polanco, but you got, Benj back and Ewing. Those guys they've really kind of saved the Mets offense in terms of the depth. I think that just that one major guy will have an impact on the offense and on the defense. I mean, that's, and we have to give Lindor credit on that side of it too. In the whole configuration that puts, I think that will help Bo over at third, and he looked better as before the injury to Lindor. He looked better at third, looked more comfortable there at third. So yeah, I think the defense will get better too, with a basically a staff, at least the starting staff, that is more pitch to contact than anything else. So I think you'll get better in 2 areas right out of the gate. Will it completely help their rotation? Of course not. They're going to have to pitch better, and we've kind of spoke about that. But I do think it'll upgrade them, enough there where that maybe those games that are going against you, you're losing in a slugfest, or that you might win a couple of those. And sometimes that's all it needs, more on the mentality part, that okay, now we're seeing some progress here, and you can try to get some kind of realistic win streak going, which they just have not been able to do.
If the Mets could generate some runs, I'm not saying it completely will offset the rotation, because it won't, but if they could get these games to be close, the Mets bullpen has been one of the best bullpens in baseball this year. And so if you could do that, and Lindor, you might have to deal with a slow start right out of the gate. He's a historical slow starter. He hasn't played at the major league level in quite some time, and it'll still be a good sight to see, to have Lindor, Bichette, and Soto in the lineup, because that essentially hasn't happened this year, because Soto got hurt. It wasn't for a long period of time, but basically right when he was coming back, Lindor got hurt for an extended period of time. So having those guys, I think, will make an impact. And then at the bottom of the order, Jim, Francisco Alvarez, Mark Vientos, Brett Baty. I don't know what the playing time is going to look like for the latter two. Alvarez has been fine since he came back. I think what it comes down to with him is he's probably never going to reach the potential that you, I, and many in the industry thought he would be as a prospect. But I think he's perfectly fine. Like, he's an above average offensive catcher, even with the stats as you look at them right now, just given the position and how hitters hit there. But Mark Vientos, Brett Baty, are these guys going to be at all regular players here in the second half?
They really need one of those guys to become an everyday player, to make out that lineup and to give that the length that good offenses around the league look like. Right now, the Mets are very top heavy, and they have been for most of the season. And, I thought if you had, if you and I put a little side bet on at the beginning of the season, I would have said, "Oh, Vientos is going to be the guy." I've been on his train, going back to last year at the deadline. I'm like, "Don't trade him. He's going to make you look bad." And he was heating up around the deadline, and then he's had this inconsistency, and now it looks like things are just gotten in his head, and he needs a change of scenery. That's what it looks like. And I'm not so sure Baty's going to figure it out either. Like, it feels like he is what he is right now. And, they could have handled his positioning a little better early on too, and put him over at third base when Lindor got hurt, and moved Bichette to shortstop. They got too cute in the decision making, in my opinion, and played him out of position. That's not easy to do. Like finding players that can play multiple positions and maintain their offense and be a good defender. Like not many in around the sport do that. And they were trying to make Baty that. I don't think he's really that guy. So trying to defend him a little bit and how kind of the usage. Having said all that, I don't think that the bat is going to end up playing enough to be that everyday player that some people were thinking about. I had Vientos ahead of Baty. It looks like I'm going to be wrong too, And so, if they do go on a little bit of a run, that is an area that they need to shore up, is to find another offensive bat of some kind. Because does anybody know when Polanco's coming back? I don't think Robert, we'll see him the rest of the year the way it looks. So they need some more offense is really the point. And, it's not just about Lindor. Lindor hopefully gets you the bridge until, the middle of July, when you can figure out that maybe you've made a run and you go out and get somebody else.
It's very disappointing, Jorge Polanco's injury and everything. And, SNY posted a little while ago, he was running and it looked like with some high velocity on the field today at Citi Field. So maybe, but I feel like every time Jorge Polanco just ramps up, the next day, it bothers him. And, we need to slow the roll again. So I'm honestly on the train that I'll believe that I see Jorge Polanco or Luis Robert the day I open up Twitter and see SNY posted the Mets lineup and one of them are in it. Like that's the day I'm going to believe it. I don't think you're going to see either of them the rest of the year.
And really to believe it, that's okay. It's one thing to be in the lineup there for a game or two, but then can they be in that, for an extended period of time? Can they stay healthy for the rest of the year, which is another whole different, question or question mark really, because, if you go look at Polanco's history, he's had a number of different seasons where it has not been good. More recently, the 2024 season was where he had all those injuries, lower half injuries, and wasn't, was not a good player. And then he went back to Seattle after very little interest in the sport. He went back to Seattle and had a great season last year, and that's where the Mets were making their evaluation. But the right now it looks like a misevaluation of fact that they were going off of one good season, and I'm with you. I'm very skeptical. This feels an awful lot like that 2024 season for Polanco.
Jim, I know there's still time. We're 6 weeks away, but I want to put you in the seat as a GM. How much prep for selling should David Stearns be doing right now in preparation? Let's say they don't go on that run. You can't decide on July 25th, okay, now we're going to sell and then try to scrap together things in a quick week. But how much should Stearns be operating, not just selling, but also like what buying opportunities are too? And I know that a lot of Met fans are going to roll their eyes when I say that, because every single person I talk to just tells me the season is over. But if they, and maybe, and it's certainly trending in that direction. I'm not here to completely fight that, but barring a real run, a real winning streak, as we mentioned earlier in the show, at this point on June 23rd, what is a GM doing in preparation of the trade deadline?
So most of the GMs, and David is in this category as well, they're in that evaluation mode. And what that it's a it sounds very basic, but it's more complicated than that. You're finding out what everybody's needs are, what they want as they get closer to the deadline. You're getting an idea of what is going on in the industry, where you might match up most. And he has to play both sides of it. They call it arbitrage. You can do a little bit of buying and selling. That's at a minimum. He has to be able to look and see, all right, what guys do I have that teams have interest in, and what can I get back? Can I do a major league for major league trade? There aren't a ton of those that are done at the deadline, but there are some, and some teams are better at it than others. But is there something out there that he could do at a minimum where he gets a player or two under control for a guy that's going to be an expiring contract? Let's say Peralta pitches better. Could they get a starter, that under control, for another year? Maybe he's not as good. Maybe he's a back end starter, but maybe, can you get that? Can you, move a reliever who's going to be, let's say Luke Weaver, like what they did last year with San Francisco. But the Giants got three players that could help their major league team in, various way. I mean, not only Budo, Gilbert, and Blade Tidwell. All three of those guys had some, major league experience that in some, evaluations, there's deals like that are out there. So he has to look at it from the sell side, but he also has to look at it from the buying side as well. And that's a little more difficult. It's more complex, but general managers in the Mets, like the Mets situation, they're accustomed to do it. And David's been doing it for a long time. So, this is not new to him. And it is something that, he should be able to pivot and do either quickly, depending on what side of it they're on in 3 to 4 weeks.
You mentioned the bullpen, Jim, and that's obviously been an area of strength for the Mets this year. And if the season doesn't go the way the Mets want, you just mentioned what a guy like Tyler Rogers net at the deadline last year. The Mets could have Brooks Raley, AJ Minter, like you mentioned, maybe Luke Weaver, though that kind of falls into that one extra year of control kind of situation that you talked about earlier. Maybe Huascar Brazoban has some trade value. So that could be an opportunity if it comes to it that they have to sell, that they could acquire some value there from their bullpen. And Freddy Peralta is a different discussion that I think he needs to turn his season around. And if he does, then I think that value will be there and they'll be able to get at least something pretty good because as you mentioned earlier in the show as well, starting pitchers do have high value on the market.
Yeah, I think that, if you have good pitching, it's for, this year, and we've seen that over the last 5 years, teams are paying a premium even for relief pitchers. The way they view pitching in general is they pay for outs. They're not necessarily paying for innings, right? So that's why when, I was telling this earlier, like there's about 8 teams that are looking for starting pitching. There's over half the league looking for relief help because they realize that, hey, you know what? My rotation, I'll get as many outs as I can, and then I'll just piece it together with a really, really good bullpen, 5, 6, 7 guys, the way the Padres have done it as an example over the last couple of years. Like that's where, some of these premium prospects are going for relievers now, right? So if you're on the Mets side of things and you're in the selling mode, you almost have to trade Luke Weaver. He's at his peak value, even with an extra year, and you go, you know what? I'll find another Luke Weaver on the free agent market this winter and bring him in next year. That type of conversation, is going on right now as we speak. And maybe you don't move Brazoban and he moves into Luke Weaver's role, for the remaining 2 months. And, you maybe decide to keep one of Minter or Raley and the other stays. And then, there's a lot of other things. Maybe at that point, this is where, you look at Jonah Tong, who hasn't been pitched well. Maybe by then he's pitching well, and you bring him up and you stick Manaea back in the bullpen. There's a lot of different things that can happen over the course of the next few weeks. And I think being able to do any of those things and keep all of your options open is really what the Mets will be doing.
You're listening to the Mets Pod. Subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcasts, Spotify. You can watch on SNY's YouTube channel or wherever you get your podcasts. All right, Jim, let's do one of our favorite things. Let's go down on the farm. It's presented by Binghamton University. Start your future at Binghamton University, the only New York college named a top 10 public Ivy by Forbes. This week, it's an early poll from our mailbag. It's from Reimer at ReallyMReimer on Twitter. What is going on with Kevin Parada? Is he finally becoming the player we thought he could be? Jim, I don't know how much you've kept up with what Kevin Parada has been up to lately. Obviously, former top 11 pick. The Mets obviously were really high on him. He was a top 100 prospect in baseball at one time, and it seemed like he was just trending squarely in the direction of a guy that's not going to end up being a major league player. And that doesn't go too far back, Jim. Earlier this year in Double-A, Kevin Parada was hitting 184, 298, 224 with a 522 OPS. He got called up to Triple-A almost out of necessity that they just needed another catcher at the Triple-A level. And so far in 21 games in AAA, he's hitting 339 with a 400 on base and a 484 slug. That's good for a 884 OPS. And I went under the hood a little bit to kind of dive into what's going on with Parada. And there is some, BABIP luck for him, but he's hitting the ball hard. Average exit velocity near 90 miles an hour, a 47% hard hit rate, an over 12% barrel rate. And when you just watch him, his swing mechanics even look a little better than what I've seen earlier on in his career. Do you think Kevin Parada, I don't want to say become the player that we thought he could be? Like, I'm not going to declare him a future starting catcher or anything, but do you think Kevin Parada is kind of regaining some prospect? I don't even know what the word is. Some prospectiness to him.
Yes, yeah, some helium. Certainly, we'll say they blew a little helium into that balloon. I might say I don't think the balloon is completely full or it's ready to fly off, and we can say, oh yeah, that's the prospect that everyone had hoped. But I would say that if you look around, it doesn't happen often, but it does happen at the minor league level and it happens at the major league level. I always like the J.D. Martinez example of guys who made overhaul swings, at the major league level, and he went on from Houston, Houston released him. He goes to Detroit and became the J.D. Martinez, not the part-time player that he was in Houston. It does happen, more often than not, where guys make adjustments with their swing, whether it's in the wintertime. Usually it happens in the wintertime. They come into the spring, things are skeptical, but they get off to a great start and it kind of rolls. Sometimes the changes are made and it takes a little while for them to come to fruition in the minor leagues or the major leagues. With a guy like Parada, I've seen it happen before where they go to a higher level and the pitching is better, but it's also around the plate more. And just that mindset of, okay, going up there and trying to hit something hard. I know it's going to be a strike or it's going to be in the strike zone more, helps certain players. Same jump from AAA to the big league. Sometimes you see that happen as well. But, I think with Parada, to your point, like just watching a little bit of video today on him versus what I'd seen, it seems like the swing is definitely more fluid, definitely better. He's on time more. It seemed like prior to that, it was more of a two-part swing. He was getting it was a lot of soft contact and the bat head wasn't coming through the zone. So, I think that early signs are that it's a positive, but the hardest part is to be able to maintain that over the course of the remainder of the seasons. I think we can be hopeful, right? I mean, but I think in the same sense, we haven't seen that out of him. We haven't seen that kind of extended run out of him since maybe he was in Brooklyn, when he first started as a pro.
Yeah, I don't want to go crazy over 21 games, but as you mentioned from the mechanics, one thing that I'm noticing, I'm sure you noticed it as well, back when he was at Georgia Tech and even earlier on in his Mets minor league career, the best way to describe his pre-setup at the plate to me was that he was like holding a backpack over his shoulder with two hands, and the bat was like almost like rubbing against his shoulder blade. Now you look at him AAA and the hand's a little more upright. So like you said, there's maybe less moving parts in the swing. So maybe that's just something that he's worked on and is finally getting more comfortable with. And I just want to throw a couple more stats out there I know there's some people that love stats, some people that don't, but whatever, here they are. His line drive. So this is from AA to AAA. His line drive percentage is up 8%. His ground ball rate is down 11%. His strikeout rate is down from 28% to 21%. And his zone contact rate, which is, I think, just the basic barometer, how much you make contact with pitches in the zone. Right. In AA, it was 73.9%, which is a very poor number. At AAA so far, it's 86.5%, which is a bordering on plus number. So, look, Kevin Parada is a guy that I'm rooting for. Like I said, former top draft pick, former highly regarded prospect. And last question on Parada for you, Jim, before we move on. He's a catcher, right? And we know that catchers historically do take or could take longer to develop than other positions. Do you think this is just a situation that he's a catcher And it just takes longer for these things to come together because of everything that goes into being a catcher at the minor league level, learning all these pitchers, learning how to call the game, in addition to figuring out how to hit yourself.
I mean, I think that is a fair point, in the sense that, um, you know, not everybody's, and this, you've been covering prospects your whole career. Like, not every prospect's, a rise is a straight line up, right? And there's parts that become a mental hurdle sometimes, a mental block sometimes for players if they don't get off to a good start offensively. That tends to snowball, and then they make maybe some changes, and sometimes there's an overcorrection that goes on in the swing, and all of a sudden you're looking like, geez, this guy's a totally different player, totally different offensive player than he was when he was in college. How did they get to this point? Well, the grind of that position in particular, you can't just work on your hitting. You got to be prepared to call a game for your pitcher and be all in on that side of things too, and the game calling aspect and the throwing. And there's so much that comes with catching that it is quite possible that it took a while for him to kind of figure some things out, and he had some frustrations along the way too. So I think that in the end we'll find out in a couple months if he can maintain this success, and some of the ball, some of the stats that you talked about, not chasing as much and hitting the ball hard in the strike zone, like, and then the strikeout rate going down. Like, those are all positive things. Exit velocity, hard hit rates, all of those things are what you look for in a good hitter. And I think our evidence, not just our own eyes that see, hey, this guy's swing is better, but he is actually getting results too.
All right, Jim, what do you say we do some mailbag? We got some stuff from the people. First question is from Reed at _Reed on Twitter. Could you see Stearns doing a little bit of buying and selling, something like sending out Freddy Peralta, a pending free agent, and then trading for Sandy Alcantara, a cost-controlled for a couple of years kind of pitcher? He says it feels like it would make some sense. And Jim, I want to phrase this for you a little bit where, you did talk about buying and selling earlier in this show. Right. But when you look at the way the Mets are set up after this year, let's just not account for trades or anything like that. Freddy Peralta, pending free agent. David Peterson, pending free agent. Clay Holmes has an opt-out that he's certainly going to exercise because even injured, he's going to do better than 1 year, $12 million on the market. Sean Manaea entering the last year of his contract. Kodai Senga entering the last year of his contract. Those are both in 2027. How much does David Stearns need to, at this deadline, look to acquire a starting pitcher that has that extra year to maybe make his offseason job a little bit easier? I think back to when the Mets traded for Marcus Stroman, and they got him with a extra year of control, gave up a couple prospects, but they did it to kind of protect themselves for next year. And right now, the Mets rotation is going to have, it's already right now a struggle, but when you head into the offseason, there's going to be a lot of holes with minimal answers because guys like Jonah Tong and Jack Wenninger haven't taken that next step. Jonathan Santucci might be like a little bit away. So when you look at the deadline, how much does David Stearns have to focus on maybe helping his rotation for 2027 now instead of just in the offseason?
Well, I think it's an opportunity for them to do that. I believe, like, most of those guys that you just checked off, Peralta and Senga and Peterson and Holmes, like, that's 4/5 of your rotation that you were, hoping were going to be good this year. Whether, it hasn't gone the way we all thought, but you're going to have to replace them. And there's only a limited number of guys that internally that you can count on that can replace them. So if you think that there's, one of the hard parts is going to be who is actually available on the trade market for starting pitching, outside of Alcantara. I'm not even sure that he is going to be available. But if he is, absolutely, he should be on their radar to try to trade for. But Miami right now is above 500 and trending, and they're in the mix for the wild card. So I don't know why they would move him unless they were really overwhelmed with prospects. And this too, like, some of the prospects right now that the Mets have to offer, if they were to trade them, they're not having good seasons. And so the value's down on them a little bit. That's the other part. This kind of a kick in the teeth season right now is your major league team isn't going well. And some of those prospects, they're helping. You have a couple guys helping your major league team, and then a couple other ones that have kind of, hit or miss type of, seasons so far. So ideally, yes, you should be able to, and it would be great for them to at least fill one of those roles. And maybe that becomes someone they get in a Luke Weaver trade where they get a starting pitcher that isn't quite ready this year, but is ready next year. That's a possibility too.
Yeah, I don't hate that idea. Just a guy that's maybe at AAA, that's close, that's just not quite there yet. But you know what would really solve it, Jim? Just get Artie Moreno on the horn. Tell him, you guys aren't going anywhere anytime soon. You don't need Jose Soriano or you don't need Reed Detmers. Just send them to Queens. One thing I'd love to see at this deadline, and something that Stearns always did in Milwaukee, which we've yet to really see outside of, I guess, Huascar Brazoban probably here, is that under the radar trade that no one saw coming that pays off big dividends. Like you said, we can't tell you right now on June 23rd what starters are available, but David Stearns' job is to be combing the market and finding somebody. There might be a team that has a little more starting pitching than they need. And I think Seattle, for example, they're already piggybacking good starters. Like, is there an opportunity in Seattle where you could alleviate some of their salary in the rotation? I don't know if he's necessarily the best fit, but I just want to throw out a name like Luis Castillo or someone like Bryce Miller. Like, they're a good team, but right now they have so many starters. They're having legitimate starting pitchers piggybacking now. So maybe that's a fit.
Yeah, I like that. And they need bullpen help too. As Munoz at the back end for them has been really struggling here as of late, and that's been the one hole in their pitching that's been it's been a struggle. And the rise of Emerson Hancock out there in the rotation has gotten to the point where now it could make Miller available, could make Castillo available. I don't think you can get Kirby or Gilbert. I don't think or Wu for that matter. Although I'd love to see Brian Wu if they did make him available. But I think to your point, like there are deals potentially like that, dealing from a position of strength like Seattle is, from a position of strength what the Mets have, which is the bullpen. So yeah, I think those are the type of things when you're looking at major league for major league type of deals that are not done as much, but they are done occasionally. And, I think that, both of those general managers or presidents of baseball operations, Jerry Dipoto, David Stearns, are creative enough and have a relationship where they could pull something like that off.
If there's one thing Jerry Dipoto likes to do, he loves to trade. I always compare Jerry Dipoto. He's that guy in your fantasy baseball or fantasy football league, whichever one you play, that just incessantly torments you to trade. He doesn't care what the trade is. He just needs to make a trade. Yeah, so
that's right.
Maybe that's something to keep an eye on here. Last one we got for you, Jim, from @Eric Erstein on YouTube. With the Mets front office being very involved at every level, who do you think is responsible for making the lineup decisions that are so obsessed with left versus right splits? I do not understand why there should ever be a situation to start Eric Wagaman in right field. This is not the only time we have seen this type of lineup tinkering. Who is calling the shots? So what I want to say before you answer really quickly here, Jim, I think I understand where a lot of people are coming from, and I hear a lot of fans, because they're in my mentions, so there's no choice for me but to see them, that they're anti-analytics. They don't like all the analytics that go into everything. Are we getting to the point that left-right splits are bad? Like, left-right splits are 50 years old. Those aren't analytics. That's just the way it is. Right. I do agree with what Eric is saying here, that I don't think Eric Wagman should be spending much time in right field, and I didn't love sitting AJ Ewing, even though it was a tough lefty and he struggled against lefties. But I also think on the other side of the coin, what fans do need to accept is minor leaguers, the way their schedule works, they have a day off guaranteed every week. They're off every Monday. And most organizations will give players at least one extra day off every other week. So they're not used to playing this number of games. So AJ Ewing, Carson Bench, they're going to occasionally sit. It was a tough look on Saturday, obviously, to have Wagaman in right and and Ewing on the bench. But I guess when you look at it, and you talked about it at the top of the show with Peterson and his usage, who do you think is calling the shots as far as who's filling out the lineup card for the Mets on a day in, day out basis?
Well, it's definitely a good question and a fair question. I think that the role of the front office has, over the last 10 years, has evolved into one where it's more of a collaboration and a helpful role than it is. At times when I was in the front office, it would be confrontational. It'd be the general manager, or it'd be, hey, the GM is involved with building the roster. The manager is, his job is to get the most out of that roster, to fill out the lineup, and there is no crossover. Now there's incessant crossover, almost to the point in some organizations where the front office, whether it appears to be or actually is, they're giving them the lineup based off of matchups, based off of that night's starting pitching, the stuff that he has. I'll go back. Bobby Valentine used to do this type of thing with his teams, and he didn't even have the statistics that we have now or the analytics that we have now. I'd sit at the cage and I'd say, hey, why are you starting Matt Franco today? Or this Mark Johnson, who was a power hitter that had very limited success. But invariably he would say, well, this guy's got a good curveball, and Mark's swing path, is good for, to hit breaking balls. And so I think he has a chance to produce tonight. And almost always he would do that. Like he did it with his eyes. Now we have statistics and analytics and all these reports that tell us that. So I wouldn't take it out on Eric Wagman. He's the best option that Carlos Mendoza has that night. If you're going to give, Ewing a night off, because he needs it every once in a while, you'd rather do it against a tough lefty where he's going to have a hard time getting a hit anyway. The problem is Mendoza doesn't have a better option than Wagman. Right. That's a roster issue. That's a front office issue that has to get better. So, I understand the point. They should have a better right-handed hitter to go to in that type of situation where it doesn't become this glaring thing like, well, geez, it should have been Ewing over Wagman. Well, that answer is obvious 9 times out of 10. I just wouldn't do it against a tough lefty because he needs a time off anyway. You'd rather him get the time off against the lefty than, a righty that he can hit better. So, it's a more complicated answer than just left on right and right on left, as always. But I also think it's limited in the choices that Carlos has. And I do think that, is there an environment that Carlos can go in there and disagree with his boss and feel comfortable doing it? I don't know. We're not there in the middle of that. I don't know the answer to that, but I have had questions myself on that. Why isn't there more pushback than what I'm seeing from our vantage point? When we you and I have conversations with people in the organization, outside the organization, and we're pretty in tune with how decisions are made. I wonder, can somebody actually say, no, I see this recommendation, I have a gut feel, I'm going to go in this direction and feel good about it, and actually disagree without ramifications? I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah. That's the $1 million question, because I'm with you. The Mets are, from everything that I've heard and know of, a very collaborative organization in every decision that's being made. So I think Carlos Mendoza is involved in these decisions. I don't know if it is. I would say I'm confident it is not David Stearns is handing Carlos Mendoza a piece of paper that says, this is your lineup tonight. Right. I think they are talking collectively with Stearns, with the analytics staff, with Mendoza, to make what makes the most sense on a given day, whether it's rest, who needs to be rested, who's available, left-right splits. Like you said, even going back to what Bobby V did back in the day about swing path. Like now they have actual data to talk about the swing path. Bobby V just knew ball.
That's right. That's right.
And this is not Moneyball where, Billy Beane wants Scott Hatteberg in the lineup every day, and if Art Howe doesn't want to do it, he's sending Carlos Pena to Detroit, and then now you have no choice but to play him. We're not gonna. I don't think we're seeing that. I don't think there's that type of dissension in the Mets organization, but I do think it's a fair question, and I do wonder, just like you said, if David Stearns and the staff had this recommendation, does Carlos Mendoza have the right to say, I don't agree, it should be this, and then Carlos Mendoza gets his way, or is it maybe sometimes that happens, and sometimes the front office says, well, we're going to go with this. So it is collective, and I know that's frustrating for a lot of fans because, look, we grew up on a game that, like you said, the manager managed. So you manage the team that I give you. The GM creates a roster. He hands it to the manager, and the manager fills out the lineup card on a day in, day out basis. But the bigger picture issue is not that AJ Ewing needed a day off, not that Eric Wagman's in the lineup, because his job is to show up to be ready to play wherever he's asked to play. The problem is, and again, no offense to Eric Wagman, that he is the option.
Right. That's right. That's it in a nutshell, and, there's a lot of times when, and this isn't new to this year too. I mean, we've had those conversations going back to, even the 20, I just think of the 2015 season when leading up to the deadline, John Mayberry was hitting fourth in the Mets lineup, and everybody was just outraged against the Dodgers and Clayton Kershaw. And then the next day, all of a sudden, oh, okay, here comes Yoenis Cespedes, and they go on this huge run. This is over time. We've seen this, throughout, and that's just not the Mets, and not only the Mets. It's other organizations too. Like, this is the roster that he has at the moment, based off of injuries and a lot of different factors that have gone on this year. It's not ideal, but it's not Carlos Mendoza's fault. He's just playing. Like, if he's on the major league roster, he has to and needs to try to find a spot where he can play at some point. Otherwise, what's the point of even having him up here? So he picked that. It wasn't a great look, but that's all he had.
Jim, if you want to keep any faith, just listen to what Jim just said. In 2015, where the Mets made the World Series, John Mayberry was hitting cleanup at one point not long before the deadline. Jim, I can't thank you enough for doing this, my friend. I appreciate just talking baseball with you anytime. We do it all the time, but now to do it in on the record format, I appreciate you filling in for Connor. And just tell us what else you got going on. You're at SNY right now?
I'm at SNY tonight, which is Tuesday night. I have BNNY tonight with, of course, Sal always, but Dave Lennon and Will Salmon were on together. Those two just both did articles, one on trading Clay Holmes and one on no value on Freddy Peralta at the moment. So we're going to discuss and debate that. And I've got some ideas on that front too, but I got that. Of course, I have my Sirius XM show 6 days a week on Sirius 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. From Sunday through Friday. So thanks for letting me promote that a little bit too.
Remember to subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Leave us a review with a question, and we'll look for it for a future mailbag. And, of course, you can watch the show on SNY's YouTube channel. Become a subscriber over there as well. Thank you all very much. Appreciate it, and we will see you next week.